Hi, friends. This is Wendy Harrop, and welcome to the Say Yes to Yourself podcast. On the Say Yes to Yourself podcast, you'll hear stories from women just like us who are adding the practice of saying yes in their daily lives in big and small ways, and as a result, are experiencing the truth that everybody wins when you say yes to yourself. Saying yes to yourself is a graceful unfolding, an intentional becoming of the very best version of you. It is my hope that in these conversations, we are able to find our truth and be inspired and empowered to live our very best lives. I'm so excited to go on this journey with you, and I look forward to finding a bit of our own story in each other's. Hello, friend. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so happy that we're doing this twice a week now. Are you loving it? I'm loving it. It is Friday. We are about to head into a beautiful weekend. I hope you have wonderful plans. My plans are super fun and stunning. I am headed to the airport. I'm going to Seattle to visit my in-laws, which is so fun. It's just a beautiful opportunity and decision to have an ex-husband, but not have ex-in-laws. These are just lovely, delightful people that we've shared over 2 decades of life together, and we're not done. So I am off to Seattle to visit them. We are going to see some live jazz. We're going to have some Beecher's mac and cheese, which, oh my gosh, don't even get me started on that, actually. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please DM me and I will tell you all the goodness that you need to know about this macaroni and cheese. It will change your life. Okay, what else are we going to do? We're going to enjoy that gorgeous city I love so much, and I'm going to connect with friends and women that I was in a mastermind with. It's all just so fun. This saying yes to ourselves business is one delight after the other. It is joy-filled. It is full of curiosity and discovery and alignment and awareness, so that when we are invited into a glorious experience, we can eagerly respond yes. It's so fun. And we also know everybody wins when we say yes to ourselves. It's so good. Oh my goodness. Okay, so today's guest is a repeat Say Yes to Yourself podcast guest. I don't know what we're going to call them. She is a returning Say Yes sister. That's what we will say. Cleo Childs. She is a spoken word poet, which means she reads her poetry to music. You might remember her episode a couple of years ago. She did this beautiful project, which was a tribute to her mom, who was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and it was just so moving and beautiful. And now in this new project, she is putting words to very difficult, very courageous topics and conversations. She is giving a voice to women that may feel like they don't have one. It is a poignant, moving, timely project. I'm so excited to have her back, to have you hear the motivation and the heart behind this beautiful piece of artistic creativity genius. She is a delight. She is saying yes to herself in so many ways, and the ripple effects are going far and wide. And I am just thrilled to share this conversation with Cleo Childs with you.
Cleo, I am so excited to have you back. Thank you so much for being here. I don't have that many repeat visitors, so I am happy to have you numbered among the few. Thank you so much for coming back.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. It's just an absolute joy, honestly. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And I had to have you back because you're prolific. So tell me, how are you saying yes to yourself in this season?
Oh, I'm saying yes to myself in a lot of ways. So I'm saying yes to myself by writing. So I finished a book. So I took, when I was first here, I talked about my poetry album. Well, I expanded my poetry album and now I've written a book. And so it's going to be coming out next year. I'm going to get it beautifully illustrated and it's going to be just absolutely lovely. And so I'm really excited about that. So I said yes to writing. And then I've said yes to writing about things that matter to me, including women's
Mm.
issues. And so being able to tell women's stories. And so I wrote the entire album in a month, or not in a month, I wrote it in a week.
Oh, my word.
I know. I just was really, I was really impassioned. And I think I used that impassioned, feelings to be able to write about things that are important to me. And what was really important to me is telling women's stories that I haven't heard before in the media. And so I wanted to be able to tell women's stories because I feel like if we tell stories that we know exist and we are witness to them, then that allows us to invite change in, and that allows us to be able to actually maybe be able to change some of these stories that we all know. Because I know these women and I realized I had never heard their stories told before, and I really wanted to be able to bring light into women's stories that I believe are important, but also they are not unique, unfortunately. And so I wanted to be able to tell stories about women in a really impactful way. And so I just got inspired and I wrote for about a week. And then I went and I got it recorded in Nashville again. And then I am going to be releasing it on International Women's Day. So, woohoo, yay, women.
Hooray. I love all of that. Now, what inspired, obviously, there was a catalyst for your first
Mm-hmm.
piece of work, and that was losing your mom.
Yeah.
Was there something that, was there an event or an experience that prompted this new project, or was it just a knowing or a realization that you were starting to hear a lot of things that you thought needed a larger platform?
I think what the catalyst was, it was kind of an evolution, quite honestly. I'm really inspired by songwriting and by lyrics. And I think I love lyrics and I love songwriting. And I was listening and I realized that I had heard many different ways of the same story from a male's perspective, which was my wife left and now I'm upset. And I realized I had not heard the woman's story though. And I kept thinking to myself, well, why did she leave? And the story that I know from a lot of women is she left for probably a very good reason. Your ego got hurt and bruised, and now you went scorched earth on her life and you just destroyed her in the divorce proceedings. That's the story that I know. And I realized that I had not heard that story to the same degree as I had heard these stories about, oh, the wife left me and now I'm sad and angry. Well, I was like, well, where's the story about the women that I know where the wife leaves and your ego gets bruised and then you go and destroy her life? And then I realized that there were a lot of different stories that I had heard one side of the perspective on, really in the media. And I had not heard the woman's perspective. So, like another one that I wrote was I had never heard Eve's perspective. What is Eve's perspective on if I was Eve? And what I realized is that from my perspective, I would have felt trapped in Eden. I would have felt trapped and I would have felt that I was really just brought here for not anything to do with my own control. I was brought, like, from the biblical story, I reread it, I was born of Adam to serve Adam and to serve God. But I'm like, well, where's me as a person in this story? And so what I did is I put agency back into the hands of Eve. Eve's retelling, though, is if there was agency, because there could have been. And if there was agency, I feel so inspired by Eve's story when I put agency back into Eve's hands.
What does that sound like? What does agency look like in Eve's story? Can you share?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to read the poem for
Oh,
you?
please. That'd be great.
Adam loaned me his rib to be paid with interest. His shooting the shit with God, not my business. No one asked me what I had to think or say. They both expected me to be grateful to get laid. Can you know you're thirsty before tasting thirst? Eden, such a pretty name to give a jail of dirt. What's the point of living if you're living in a lie? What's the point of trying if they don't let you try? Knowledge was made forbidden, so I sought it. Searched the whole garden from top to bottom. Free will is power, and losing power is frightening. God's white knuckled chokehold is a vice held tight. The devil was not ashamed to skim across the grass. Smooth bellied, full of sin, fangs a sharp and poison mass. We became friends, sharing feelings of being unequal. He didn't treat me as feeble, as he respected all people. We invited the apple to join our escape as it looked bored. Together shared a bitter laugh, feeling ignored by the Lord. With steadiness and encouragement, I grabbed the apple, smiling, kissed it with gratitude, savoring my defiant act. God spit us out, but pride staked its claim behind my eyes. While I now know pain, I'd rather experience truth over lies. Women deemed foolish, but I think clearly for the damned. No longer hungry for apples, as knowledge keeps me fed.
Wow.
I think it's this idea of women deemed foolish, but I think clearly for the damned is the thing that really just spoke to me, is because I realized that there are a lot of stories that I've been told about what it was like to be a woman. And I think it came back to this idea about Eve and shame, that there was shame as if to say that I was the reason, and Eve was the reason that, we were spit out of the Garden of Eden to begin with. And there's that shame around it. But I thought if I could retell the story in regards to it was a decision, and it's, well, I now know pain, I'd rather experience truth over lies.
It's so interesting because as a person going through a divorce and a person raised in church, I hear more of my divorce story in what you read about Eve than
Mm-hmm.
like, oh no, God's really nice. And I do believe God's really nice. And
Yeah.
I do believe that, whatever, we won't make this a theology situation.
Yeah.
I'm who interpreted the Bible and not a woman. And all of those good things. But I think it's really fascinating. I'd love to hear more about how these stories have informed your perspective and what changed in that process. Because I think there's something so beautiful about awakening and about becoming angry, giving injustice your voice is powerful, because when you are in those situations and you feel stuck, if you feel powerless, even the idea of fighting feels fruitless. But when you move emotionally up the emotional scale from fear and hopelessness, depression, powerlessness into rage,
Mm-hmm.
you're actually moving up the emotional scale. And now it has a voice, and you can use your voice and move from guilt to blame is going up the scale. So I love the, not necessarily if this has been your experience, but what's coming up for me in this is there's something so refreshing about new anger, because there's energy behind it and action behind it, instead of feeling like I'm just too tired to try.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it's the removal of shame.
Mm.
I think that there's really a lot of power in removing shame.
Isn't there?
And I think that I have been told, for a very long time by society, by people that mean well, by family, by friends. I think that there was a lot of what's good for you is to be quiet. What's good
Mhm.
for you is to be gentle. And there is strength in gentleness. My mother, for example, was a very gentle woman. And I'm not saying that there isn't strength in gentleness. I think there's incredible strength in gentleness, but I think that the intentionality behind it is incredibly important. I think that if one is to be gentle, it should come from a place not of contracting oneself in order to fit into society's normal box, but out of the goodness of one's heart. I think the intention behind it is very important. And also, it's rage about the injustice that have been done to women.
Yes. It's ridiculous.
It makes me so angry. And it makes me angry because I know these women.
Mhm.
And I haven't heard their stories yet, but I know them, and we all know these women. And I went to my friends and I read this to all my girlfriends and I said, what do you think about this? And she goes, I know that woman, because we all know that woman. There's a story that I did about, the woman who is in a relationship where it is a person in like authority. So in this case, it would be like I put it as a police officer, and he puts a restraining order on him, but because he isn't a person of authority, the restraining order isn't kept, and so she can't get out. And I know that woman. I've heard that story, and I wanted to say that I think by hearing stories and by telling stories, that can invite change. And then by inviting change, we can be able to change in a way that is beneficial for women,
Right.
which is
Right.
incredibly important. But I think that coming back to it, what it is it's a removal of shame about who I need to be in order to live in a society and how I need to change myself in order to better fit the society, rather than saying maybe society can be able to be benefited from women standing up and owning themselves and having agency and doing what's best for them. And collectively, we can be able to be stronger together if we're more true and authentic within ourselves rather than conforming to societal norms, which have been predicated and put onto us for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Preach, sister. Yes. And I think that there's so much that comes from sharing of stories that you you do take back your own power. You do show yourself that you're worthy of sharing the experience that you are having. It's happening.
Mhm.
And sometimes we can think that if we ever say it out loud, that we'll be in trouble or whatever has kept us quiet. But whoever goes first makes it so much easier for the second one, the third one, the ninth one, the 122nd one. And there is this collective and this strength in this collective that it can't be ignored. And our power and our camaraderie and our sisterhood in this is not necessarily to destroy the other person.
Mm-mm.
It's just to lift her up. And
Mhm.
whatever the side effects of women and their power has on the patriarchy, well, that's just going to be how it is. But the the purpose of this rising, the purpose of this deciding this is no longer okay. I am no longer available to live in this situation, to put myself through this, to hand my power over to whatever I'm experiencing myself or am witnessing experienced by other people. That it's that collective rising that is the goal. That is that's where the change comes because of the tsunami of people that are using their voice. Change is the only option.
And I think too is the idea is not only is change the only option, but change becomes maybe not even inevitable, but it becomes a possibility.
Right.
And I think that it's important for people to live authentically in regards to who they are as a person rather than who they need to be to conform to a system that is meant to be able to keep people complacent, basically.
Yep,
And I
exactly.
think that it's so important because it's by telling stories that there becomes ownership. And through ownership, there becomes power. And through power, there becomes agency. And through agency, that is where action comes and that's where change comes. And I really just wanted, with writing this, like I wrote a poem and it's about how hard being a mom is sometimes for people. Because I went to my friends and I said, what are the things that you deal with as women that you really don't feel that is talked about? And one of my friends went and she said, I didn't realize how hard it was going to be a mom. No one told me how hard it was. And I asked her for her story and she gave it to me. And I said, do you mind if I put this into a poem? Because I feel like you're not alone. And she said, yes, please. And I did. And then I read it to her. And she said, for the first time, I don't feel alone. And I really feel like that's what, by being radically honest, which is what I hope to do, is, and being truthful and authentic into the stories and to treat them with reverence, but also to treat them with a knowledge that these are people's stories, that people can identify with them, and through identification of feeling there and hearing their story, that they realize that they're not alone. And I think
Exactly.
that there's power in, as you were saying, there's power in connection and there's power in identification that you are not alone, because that is how change happens. I think is not only through not realizing that other people are going through the same thing that you're going through, that we are not as isolated as
Exactly.
we think that we are, or that we're told that we are.
That's the word that was coming up for me. That's isolation is a trap. And we
Mhm.
think if this is happening, nobody can know that this is happening. Like you said, the shame and isolation are
Mhm.
bedfellows.
Yep.
And whichever one you choose to become unavailable for first, the other one has to follow. If you are
Yeah.
not living in shame, what you're living in agency, then isolation doesn't have a place here. And if you step out of isolation, shame loses its foothold as well.
And what I'm hoping is I even wrote stories from girls' perspectives, this idea, because those are stories that I went through, some of them some degree. There's always a bit of me in them, but there's also a bit of some women that I know. I don't know if everyone else has had this experience, but I certainly did, where there was a guy that was no good for me, that saw my, naivete, and he saw that I probably, came from a kind of not broken, but definitely a hard home where I, left with some trauma. And because of that, he was able to prey upon me. And I know that there's all these girls that go through the same thing. And what I did beforehand is, when I was young, is I thought that was my fault
Right.
in regards to, I put him in a situation where he treated me like this and I let him do it. And how could I be so stupid? Rather than the real, now that I'm older, the anger comes into, how dare he, you know?
Right.
And I wanted to be able to tell not only women's stories, but girl stories.
Yes. Yes, because the question should never come up, well, what were you wearing?
Exactly.
Like, I'm like, ah, I'm I don't want an explicit note on this podcast, but that's where
Yeah.
my bad words come out.
Well, and like the idea too,
Yeah, please read whatever you want.
well, and what I was going to say is, I wrote, the gazelle knows to be afraid of the lion. Why didn't I know to be afraid of you? As if to say that it was on me. And I thought so long that it was. That was just a story that once again was told to me.
Right. It's everything about the Me Too movement.
And I'm so, what I'm hoping is, I know that these are microscopic stories in regards to the
Correct.
grand stories that a women can share with each other. And what I hope to do is, I hope to be able to go and to put out some stories that I know of and wrote in such a way, and that hopefully change or action can come from other women sharing their stories. And that way we can be able to not feel, going back to the idea, I so isolated, and things that we think are still stories, not realizing that they are more universal.
Yeah.
Because we have all been taught or told, or at least I was told that by someone who was much older than me, that I could not be who I was supposed to be because no one would want to marry me if I was more intelligent than a man. I was told
Oh
that
my
at 18,
gosh.
no, I wasn't even 8, I was 17, that they said that you can't do that. And I said, what can I do not do? And they said, you can't show that you're more intelligent than someone because no one will want to marry you. And I believed that because I was told to that from a person of authority from a different time. But that's just one example of these stories about, and then I was told, oh, you're funny, but that doesn't mean that you're intelligent, right? Meaning that you're putting people into boxes. And I think that there's all these stories about, if you can shed the stories and figure out what is the truth that you know to be, and start to trust yourself. There was a wonderful quote that I read that I trust women that trust themselves. But I think that that's a thing that we have to learn how to do because it's really not been taught to us, or
Right.
at least it wasn't taught to me, because I was told a lot of my instincts are bad, right? These things that like, oh, that you shouldn't do that. You need to make yourself small because if you're small, you're now more easier to digest and people will like you more because your number one thing is not to be actually truthful to oneself and one's experience and to put boundaries down. Your number one thing should be to be liked.
Right.
And so I didn't know boundaries because
Sure.
boundaries weren't conducive to me being liked.
Right. They were all in the hands of other people.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm not alone in that was the message that was given to me. And my message also was, you need to make yourself as small as possible because no one likes a woman that goes and speaks her mind. And so you need to not speak your mind.
Right. Nobody likes us.
Yeah. And no one's going to marry you, which is your number one thing to do in all of life, because I was told that I could not be intelligent because no one would want to marry me. And I believed it. And I put myself down for so long because I thought, if my number one thing is to be liked, my number one outcome is to get a good marriage. And I came from a family that's relatively progressive in regards to women need to be independent. You need to have your own financial freedom because financial freedom equals real freedom. You need to have choices.
How are you going to do that when you're not intelligent and you're not taking up space and you're not loud and you're not like that's so many mixed messages.
Yeah, that was from a family friend. And I told my grandma that, and my grandma was horrified when she found out that her friend had told me that I needed to not be intelligent. She said, I raised you to be intelligent. I raised you to be grandma's a matriarch. Grandma's a steel magnolia. She's 93. And grandma, she said, absolutely not. Do not listen to that. That is nonsense. I realized I'm also incredibly lucky because I came from a family of strong, educated women. My aunt, she has a PhD and a postdoc in like veterinary science. And my grandma, she is the most educated person I know about literature. And my aunt is an amazing computer scientist. And I was told from a very young age that financial freedom is real freedom because it gives you choices and it gives you agency. And during that, though, I still got mixed messages in regards to, you need to dress a certain way or you can't be a certain weight because that would make you unattractive to anyone and no one will take you seriously. Like you can't speak a certain way if you don't do that. But my number one thing, what I learned is that I need to be small because being small makes me liked. And my number one thing is not to be authentic to myself and my experiences. My number one thing is to be a person that's likable.
Right. I mean, isn't there, I don't know who said this quote originally. I heard it from Mark Groves that when we are faced with authenticity or belonging, we often choose belonging.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that by telling the stories, there's a chance potentially, because I can't control how people interpret them or what they do. But my hope is that people won't feel so isolated in isolating situations.
Right. It's a different kind of belonging.
I'm so inspired by this younger generation because they are just owning themselves in a way that I hadn't seen. And they are expressing themselves in a way that I didn't know was possible when I was younger.
Because they're being raised by women who are no longer available to be small.
And I think that that is such, and it's a scary thing though, to go and not be small. I think that's one of the other things too, is I think it's terrifying because you're going against all of the training and all of the social norms that have been told to you.
As hard as you make it, honestly. Like I changed the rooms I went into.
Yeah. And I've changed friend groups. I've
Mhm.
changed, I luckily have found an amazing partner who, you know, I did not do it, but I am petty a little bit, if I'm being honest with myself. But for the longest time, I said, I'm going to find a man. And when I'm going to get her a front row seat to my wedding, when I marry someone who's glad that I'm intelligent, you know, and I didn't do that, but I am just so impressed and I have so much hope for the fact that we can redefine ourselves.
That's
And
right.
we can find belonging, and we're constantly dynamic. We're not static in who we think that we are. And the brain to me, with neuroplasticity, the fact that we can rewire our brains
Mhm.
brings me so much hope, because I am such a different person than I was not only 10 years ago, but 5 years ago, and before writing this work.
That's right.
For me, writing the work, it allowed me to go and say, what are these isolating situations? How can I be able to write about them in a way that is empathetic, but also factual? And how can I also take Eve's story that I rewrote and have women deemed foolish, but I think clearly for the damned is like my new thing. And the fact that I don't have to explain myself to people. I don't.
There's a lot of freedom in that. I love that you are telling other people's stories as well, because your filter is, I love this person. They are telling me something that is shocking and uncomfortable and not surprising because I know she's not alone. And you are not running it through the filter that we've been conditioned to run all of our own stories through. Like you mentioned, well, how come I didn't know? I'm so stupid. I should have known better. I could never say this out loud. I should really consider what they were going through and why they chose to treat me this way. But when you're telling somebody else's story, it's just the facts. And it's her interpretation of her experience, which is accurate because it happened to her. And you're retelling it in a beautiful, clean way that it's not going through the filter of shame or the filter of unworthiness or the filter of worry of what if somebody reads this? What if they're offended because of their own bad behavior? I can't even make excuses for those people anymore. I've done it my whole life. So I love that you have done that, because there is freedom in writing your own story, and there can be a lot of worry of, I think I have to wait till most of the people are dead before I can publish this book because they're going to be really mad that I said this out loud. Which instead, I just like, give me nothing to talk about, please. Please stop the bad behavior and I will stop talking about it.
Mm-hmm. I wrote about the fact that my husband, so going back to the grief book, my husband and I, you know, we went through a horrible time when I was in grief. We were a happy couple pretty much. And grief almost destroyed our marriage. And I wrote about that. And my aunt went and she came to me and she said, is Kevin, my husband, is he okay with this? And I was like, I think, yeah. So I asked Kevin and I said, Kevin, are you okay with, because we've always been really honest about the fact that we have a really happy marriage now, but that's not always been the case, because I didn't want people to look at us and say, oh, they're perfect. I tell my friends all the time, like, we reached breaking points about 3 years ago. And remember reading on Reddit, why have you been married for so long? And someone said it's because we didn't want to get divorced at the same time. And I remember reading that younger, and I was like, well, and then I got older and I was like, yeah, because that's true for at least Kevin and I, because we always, the other one always was going to put effort into the relationship where we needed it. And I talked to Kevin and I said, I wrote about how we reached breaking points in the grief. And I said, are you okay with this? And he went, yeah, why wouldn't I be? And I went back to my aunt. She said, that is really rare in the fact that most people would think it was about them and would not be okay with that. But I think I tried to explain it to Kevin that it's not about you, it's about my grief journey. And you're a part of this journey. And I wanted to be honest to the fact that we reached breaking points because I wanted people to feel camaraderie in the fact that, that does happen. And that
Right.
might be normal for someone. And he understood that. But I feel like there's a lot of exposure that goes into writing something like that, because especially with the books, I put a lot of it, like I became dependent on alcohol for a while when I was going through grief. But I did it because I wanted to show the hard, because I feel like the hard, it's easy to show the easy. And it's
Right.
not as isolating to show the easy. It's a lot harder and more isolating to show the hard. And I wanted to show the hard. And that meant having a discussion with my husband to say, I want to show the hard. Are you okay with that? And he agreed, because he also agrees that there's strength and camaraderie in not feeling isolated with the hard. And I think that's what I want to do with all my work, is I want to show the hard, because I feel like that's where the isolation comes in. Not to say it's not easy. I have the joy, and I find it the most interesting work, is to show where is the hurt, because I feel like that's where a lot of the shame lies. And there's a lot of transformation in removing the hurt. I think that there's also a lot of transformation in being able to take accountability in the fact that we're human and we make mistakes. And we are imperfect beings that have been raised by imperfect beings, and we're big monkeys. We're not anthropologically, I know that like we're cousins of monkeys, but we're animals, and we're irrational creatures living in a really hard world that's really complex, and we're not perfect. And I feel like if I remind myself of that, I have so much more grace for myself when I remind myself that I'm just trying my best in all earnest, and that's not going to be the best every day, and it's not going to be perfect. But I think that I'm trying to be a good person. And that's what I hope to do, is by diving into the messiness of the human condition, that there is freeing of shame from the messiness of the human condition.
Beautifully said. How have you tackled the subject of forgiveness in these stories?
I have not, but I have a thing about forgiveness. What I say, and I won't say who it's with, but that I forgive who they were and I love who they are.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just asking because I interviewed someone a couple of weeks ago, and she had such a beautiful, because she went through something that was very traumatic and was diving into this concept of forgiveness and
Yeah.
how to do it, and all she could find was articles on why you should, but not how to. And she came up with this really beautiful, very short sentence of, I bless you with the highest love. And it felt like a practice that she was owning, but the power was coming from outside of her, from her
Yeah.
higher self. And that's so beautiful. I only mention it because I'm thinking of her and this beautiful conversation we have. I want to really be clear that I am not mentioning forgiveness as a way to like backhandedly bring the shame back into these women's stories. Like, forgiveness is the illusion that ends all illusions. That's what the Course in Miracles say. And forgiveness frees us. Like it is this, I'm going to give myself permission to tell the story, to speak my truth, and I'm going to continue to rise. And the next step is I am leaving that stuff behind.
I think that what it comes up for me is this idea of, with forgiveness, it's understanding the messiness of others.
Totally.
I forgive the messiness of others. Do I condone it?
Oh
No.
gosh, no. Are there consequences for the actions? And will
Yes.
I go to the ends of the earth to do whatever is in my power to make sure that the consequences are appropriate and not forgotten? You betcha. That's probably some unforgiveness in me talking.
But I think that when I talk about forgiveness, it's what it's coming up is this idea, though, is that by understanding and recognize the humanity in myself
Mhm.
and the imperfections and the humanity of not imperfections, but just the humanness of it, I'm able to have a lot more grace to the humanness of other people.
Right.
And I think what came first for me was giving grace to the humanness of other people rather than myself. It was like with my mom when she was going with Alzheimer's, I gave a lot of grace to everyone else around me dealing with the situation as best that they could. And my mom was the first one to give grace to me because I went kicking and screaming into this disease. I was not happy and I messed up a lot and I would be so upset. And then my mom would go, "You're okay. I forgive you." And I said, "Mom, I'm so sorry." When I would get really frustrated with her, and she goes, "I forgive you." So my mother gave me grace, I think, first, because she realized how hard it was. I think that when it comes to the hard, I have more forgiveness for the hard. It's not easy. It's not easy to be able, and there's no knowing. There is no, there in life that there is wisdom, I think, that can be passed from other people that have learned, but there is no rule book because every journey of life is so individual that there can be wisdom that can be shared, but ultimately the path of the person is so individualistic to that person that you're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. And not only are you going to make mistakes, you're going to do things that you regret. And I think that because you're human, by understanding the humanness of myself, I'm able to understand the humanness of others, which allows me to forgive them for their humanness because I have to forgive myself for my own humanness. And I love this idea of change, though. I think that for me, there's a person in my life who I never thought was capable of change. I thought, this is exactly who you are. And I hated this person with every ounce of my being. I hated them. And over time, through suffering, they lost something. And through loss, they softened. And I came back to them and I opened myself to be able to see who they are now. And I love who they are now, but they changed. And I think that that's the thing that I keep going back to is I forgive who you were and I love who you are, is because I know that people are capable of change. I've seen great change. I've seen change that I would have never imagined that someone could do. And so I think that there is forgiveness and maybe the messiness of the human condition. I have hope that there can be change with being able to own one's mistakes. I think accountability is incredibly important. And I hope that that change can be able to impact someone else. And the decision I have is, do I want to continue to be in the life of this person? And that's the decision that I have for myself. And I have the agency to make that decision. And I can wish them well in their journey and not want to go on it with them. But I think that I have great hope for the capacity to change. And I have great hope for humanity because I think that there is more good in humanity than there is bad. And I think that by removing shame, it's a step in the direction of being able to live authentically to oneself. And then we have forgiveness for ourselves when we mess up, and we have forgiveness for other people when they mess up. And we can continue to change in a way that I think is beneficial for being more authentic and honest people with ourselves and with each other.
Again, beautifully said. You are, in fact, a writer.
Oh, I'm just speaking off the top of my head. So
I love it though. But the way
this is
that
not
you,
edited.
right, but the way that you are forming your thoughts and the way that you have invested time and energy into this project, it's all influenced your narrative, and beautifully so.
Thank you. I think that we can always change for the better.
Agreed.
And I just hope to be a domino or a small part in changing for the better, and in encouraging others to share their stories, and encouraging others to live authentically and to take up space and to be the fullest, most shining version of themselves, regardless of what the world says. Because at the end of the day, I think we only, we have one life that we're living, and to live it to its fullest and to live it also to the fullest of our own selves. That's the goal, I would think. That's my goal, at least. I can't say for anyone else.
Right. My last question is, what was the experience? Can you recall the experience of one of the women who shared their stories, how it was for them on the other side of that sharing, knowing that it was going to be cast to a larger platform? How was that transformation witnessed by you?
I think that there was relief. That's the word that's coming up for it, is relief.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for holding space for women to use their voice and then sharing it in such a profound and impactful way. I really appreciate what you're doing, and I'm grateful for you and for sharing it with us here. Please tell everyone where they can find and follow you and how they can get their hands on your work.
Well, I'm Cleo Childs, so that's CleoChilds, and I have a website, so that's cleochilds.com. And then I'm working on doing the Instagrams. So we'll see how this goes from the time of recording to when it's released. So if it looks like it's going really well, then good job me. And if it's not, I have grace and I have forgiveness.
We're all doing the best we can.
We're doing the best we can with the Instagrams. And yeah, and then that's me. So you can be able to like subscribe if you want to see anything else to the newsletter that's on my website. And I, once a month we'll drop something and just keep you updated with what I'm doing. But if I may say the last thing, if I could have like a last word, which is take up space. You're worthy and deserving of it, and you are valuable.
I could not agree more. That's a giant yes, for sure. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. As always, any links or notes mentioned can be found at phineaswrighthouse.com in the podcast section of our site or in the show notes below. And if you haven't connected with me personally, come find me on Instagram at Phineas Wrighthouse and let me know you listened to this episode. I'd love to get to know you. Thank you for sharing this time with me. I know your days are full, and I'm really grateful that you chose to spend some of your precious time right here. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any of these delightful conversations. I'll see you next week.